I've been spending some time recently playing around with Druid on the War Within Alpha, and you know what? It is pretty fun. I really am enjoying Bear Druid a lot more than I had expected. They still haven't rolled out the big redesigned Bear Druid spec tree yet, which, fingers crossed that's coming down the line. But even so, just as it currently exists, I do think the class is in pretty good shape moving into the next expansion. Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about Bear and Feral Druid a little bit, but first don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, as always with these videos, these previews, I want to do the crucial disclaimer here that it's important to talk about how the classes feel more than the numbers. Damage tuning is always the last thing that's balanced and finalized before release. Design is how it feels to play, and that is what I want to focus on here more than any sort of numbers. I'm really specifically not paying attention to numbers. I really just want to focus on how the combat feels. So I have played Feral, I have played Bear, I have not played Balance. I haven't really played Balance much other than the Mage Tower and Torghast ever, and as much as I make fun of it, I actually do think it's pretty fun, but I'm definitely not in a position to talk about it on an expert level. So would rather not even waste time dilly-dallying with that. Just want to focus on Feral and Bear, which are two specs I feel like I can talk confidently about. So with that being said, I think maybe the best place to start is with some of the changes that have been made to the class tree for Druids, because those have been pretty substantial, and unfortunately I don't really think they fixed the problem with Druids, which is, it's allegedly the hybrid class of all hybrid classes. They can tank, they can heal, they can melee DPS, they can range DPS, they can do everything. And as soon as we got into Dragonflight and saw the new trees, the new talent trees, I think a lot of people, including myself, noticed that oh, this is a bunch of just straight vertical lines with no zigzagging across. If we look at the Dragonflight tree here, it's straight vertical lines. You spec into this, or you spec into this, or you spec into this, and there's very little hybridization between roles, which is pretty disappointing considering the historical legacy of Druid as a hybrid class. And they haven't really gone away from that. They've done a little bit to make it so that some things are easier to get. For example, getting Remove Corruption now only takes 2 points, 1 in Rejuve, and then 1 in Remove Corruption instead of that extra point in Swift Mend. That's been moved away into the Resto tree entirely, as it probably should have been from the beginning. There is a bit more ease of getting some talents like Hibernate and Typhoon, which aren't quite so far out. You're not having to go through Starfire to get down there. They've also, unfortunately kind of nerfed some things. Astral Influence has been changed so that it only affects spells, not skills. So if I spec into that right now, all the attacks that you have as a cat are melee range only, and this is a nerf that's been rolled out to basically all melee DPS specs in the game. Every melee DPS spec, other than Ret Paladin, who is halfway to being a caster, every melee DPS spec's melee range is melee range, 5 yards or so, 8, and 5 to 8 yards, whatever it is. And unfortunately, Cat Druid has lost out on that increased range. Both Feral and Bear Druid have lost out on Astral Influence, affecting Thrash, Swipe, Mangle, all of those skills. So, because it only affects your spells, they have buffed it back up to being 5 yards across the board for Feral and Bear. So if you spec into Lunar Inspiration as Feral, or, if you're a Bear and you want to be able to hit stuff from 45 yards with Moonfire, that is technically a buff, but in the strictest sense, this is a pretty significant nerf for both of the melee damage dealing specs for Druid. Now there's some other things in here. Feline Swiftness is arguably easier to get, a little bit less of a point commitment than it was having to take Rip and 2 points. There's been a lot of things like this where a lot of 3-pointers, such as Lycara's Teachings in the current Bear Druid or all Druid class tree, is now a 2-pointer. Feline Swiftness is a 1-pointer. There have been some positives here, and I think the pathing is a little bit better, but then there is still a lot of commitment to each of the branches at the bottom of the tree. You're no way are you capable of taking all of the all of the capstones. You can't even get close. And that is something that's very different from a lot of other class trees. Additionally, we've seen kind of some shifting around at the bottom of the tree. The bottom left kind of has this 2-point gateway that's very like feral and bear oriented. The bottom right has this 2-point gateway that is Moonfire and Sunfire damage and Rejuve and Wild Growth healing. So it's very like balance and resto oriented. Although for Lunar Bear, this is catnip for Lunar Bears, but kind of like more constrained. Once again, even though the goal here was supposedly to kind of fix some of the problems from the Dragonflight tree, it basically just seems like it has reinvented them, which is a little disappointing. Now, there are some cool talents in here. Fluid form allows you to, instead of having to like actually shift into bear form to hit mangle, you can press mangle and that will shift you into bear form from cat form. Or, if you're playing like Druid of the Claw Druid as bear and you hit shred while you're in bear form, it will just automatically shift you into cat form and cast shred or rake. Like, these are okay, but I think the main emphasis here is that you would use this as feral and bear to shift either like directly from cat into bear or bear into cat, mainly bear into cat, I really think. And so this being over in the right-hand tree kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, Well-Honed Instincts is now a 1-pointer. It's a capstone. It's all the way down here, and it is a 2-minute cooldown. So I would argue that's just a straight-up nerf from the tree as it exists now, where you could get it like, quite a bit earlier. There's some other stuff here. Oak Skin giving you just a full-fledged 10% damage reduction during Survival Instincts, and Bark Skin as opposed to the like tiny little matted fur shield. Like, I think that's probably for the best. Thick Hide being just straight up damage reduction for 1.4% as opposed to 6% for 2. Natural Recovery being 4% healing received for 1 point as opposed to healing done and healing received for 2. Like, there's a lot of give and take. I would say it's a very like conservative rebalance to the tree rather than a straight buff that we've seen for a lot of other classes. And that is, a little disappointing considering the state of their class tree was already pretty bad going into the expansion. It doesn't seem like it's really gotten a huge buff that I kind of thought it needed. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at the Feral Druid spec tree, and you'll notice that like the layout of the tree is still fairly similar. A lot of the talents are still very much the same. Capstones are pretty much all still the same as they were before. Some slight numerical tweaking, for example. But for the most part, things are definitely pretty similar in the tree, but there are some notable changes that I kind of want to point out. So first things first, Primal Wrath, the AoE rip spell, the AoE combo point finisher, has been slightly reworked. It costs 30 energy instead of 20. All right. And Tear Open Wounds, the talent that makes it so that it would eat some of that rip immediately to do some straight direct damage, has been removed from the tree. Additionally, because of that means you have to kind of take a point somewhere. Coiled to Spring is a new talent that's been put in here in place of Dire Fixation, where you get like more single target. Basically, now you get this thing where if you generate excess combo points, you get more damage on your next Ferocious Bite or Primal Wrath. This seems terrible to me. Like, that's not a good enough justification to waste combo points. I feel like maybe they can tune it to the point where it becomes that, where it's sort of like Rogue just having a 6 combo point. But, I think the design as the class is currently built, I don't really like that. I think I would rather them just make this be that 6 combo point that Rogue can get. And, I think that would be like a lot more interesting of a core concept. It just feels like bad to deliberately waste a resource. So I don't like this talent in the slightest. And then you kind of have the option of taking basically one of these 2 claws talents here. Now, notably Thrashing Claws, which you were able to use to like apply Thrash without being spec'd into it before. Now you have to be spec'd into Thrash to auto apply that Thrash bleed. It's not really a huge deal, but it does mean you have to take it, I guess, as opposed to just being able to get it for free. So not super great in the top there. One thing that I do think is really interesting here, this is a design that was added into Windwalker since I last talked about them. I cannot remember the talent that it was added into, but I do think it's pretty interesting. It's just the bottom half of this talent here. You know, Predator in the past, it was very different. Your Tiger's Fury would last longer and cooldown reset basically whenever an enemy would die with it. Now that it has been changed, this is like a real like quality of life loss for leveling as Feral Druid. I really loved Predator. It was kind of a big reason why I loved leveling as Feral Druid. You would always have Tiger's Fury up at the start of every new fight while leveling. So you basically would always have full energy. You could just like immediately charge in, build combo points, and bite over and over and over again. Felt really good. So that's unfortunate, but it kind of makes sense because, you know, that could be, it could be problematic in some AoE situations in Mythic Plus, or even like raid boss fights where you have very little dinky ads that you can kill and bleed and have them die like crazy and give you tons of Tiger's Fury coming back up. It created a design problem that then the class had to be tuned around that, and so, you know, I get it. The more interesting part here is that bottom part where your combo point generating abilities direct damage is increased by a significant chunk of your haste. This is something that we've seen with Windwalker, where haste is a wretched stat, and I would love to see with Brewmaster, where again, wretched stat, seeing haste just basically be converted into versatility. I mean, that's really what it is. Like, they're just making haste work like versatility does, or like mastery does. Like, that is really, I think, the fix for haste for a lot of specs, where it generates a resource that you don't really care about generating that much more of, or it gives cooldown reduction on spells that don't matter. I think that is definitely a fix. It's kind of the blandest possible fix to just make it do more damage instead of giving those resources that you would want more of, or cooldowns that you would want to reduce, but I still think it's better than just having basically a dead stat. So, interesting design here. I think, given the limitations that they're working with, I think it's actually pretty smart. Now, if we come down here and look at Taste for Blood, you'll see that that has obviously been changed. It's a 15% Ferocious Bite damage increase and an extra 15% during Tiger's Fury, as opposed to just 5% for each bleed on the target, which, you know, that's somewhere in the realm of like 15 to 20% more bleed damage generally, so, or more Ferocious Bite damage generally, so I don't really know if it's like a significant increase, but, you know, maybe a little bit more burst during your burst damage windows. Rampant Ferocity's been moved over in place of Infected Wounds, which obviously is here gatekeeping Taste for Blood, unfortunately. And Savage Fury is a new talent entirely that makes Tiger's Fury increase your haste and energy recovery rate. Not massive, but you know what? It's okay. I've been playing around with it just for simplicity. I think probably for like actually playing while leveling, Lunar Inspiration makes more sense just to have a pull skill, but yeah, I didn't really want to find a way to keybind that in. So, you know, a lot of the other talents in this neck of the woods are pretty similar to how they are in Dragonflight. One thing that is really notable as a difference, and, you know, I think in the current state of the class, you kind of go with Convoke anyways, but Incarnation has been nerfed. It is, instead of being a 30-second buff, as you can see here, it is now a 20-second buff. And this is something that's been done with Balanced Druid as well. Instead of a 30-second incarnation, it's now 20. Now, they haven't really talked about Bear Druid yet at all in the entire alpha. It does seem like with the alpha coming to a conclusion in just a couple of days, transitioning over to the beta, it seems like Bear Druid's not going to get mentioned one single time during the alpha, which is not the greatest sign. But Bear Druid's Incarn is still 30 seconds. I don't know if that's intended or if it's an oversight. I guess we'll see. But at this time, it seems like Incarn for Feral and Balance is kind of like very deliberately being smashed down, kind of, you know, making it so that the 30-second burst damage window that Druids were getting is going to be kind of, you know, crushed quite a bit. And I mean, I guess that makes sense. A 30-second burst damage window is quite long. So, you know, maybe a bit more like cooldown reduction or something could maybe justify that, but that isn't in the tree yet, so that's kind of where we're at. And then Apex Predator's Craving, the chance to proc free Ferocious Bites that deal like max damage, that proc chance has been reduced from 7.2 down to 6.0. those are kind of the most significant changes that I saw, at least in my understanding of Feral Druid. And yeah, you know, I think the class tree as it currently stands, I don't know that it really, at least for what I do with it, which is usually just like outdoor content, that nerf to Predator really makes me unhappy. So I think for me, at least, this feels like a nerf to tree. I don't know that Feral Druids necessarily feel the same way, but I don't think you can be feeling like amazing seeing that there are some other classes that have gotten huge buffs. Windwalker Monk is looking insane right now, and I wouldn't look at Feral Druid and go, this is incredible. I would say like, it's also present. Okay, one other thing I wanted to talk about before I move on to Bear Druid is this. Flight form, if I do it correctly, flight form is now dynamic flying, and you know, you're not required to have this on. There is this button right here, switch flight style, where you can switch to regular classic flying, but yeah, you can dynamically fly as a Druid's flight form. You have all of these standard keybinds, you know, skyward ascent and surge forward and aerial halt and all of that. And yeah, I've really enjoyed the super duper flight form as Druid. Now I know some people are going to be upset, and I think rightly so, that they could have like the dragon riding button, you know, dragon riding mount, yeehaw, dragon riding around on whatever mount. And then when they want to just do like a little flight over to those stairs, they could switch into flight form and do that. And those are not things that you can independently customize at present. Like, you can switch flight styles. It's a 5-second cast. And now I'm regular flying around like so. But my mounts are also in the same. So that's probably something that people are going to have to petition for and hope that they get in a future patch. But as it currently stands, you basically are locked into both your flight form and your mounts being either dynamic or static flying all the time. For me, I'm happy with this. Like, this makes me happy, being able to just instantly switch into flight form and dragon ride around, whatever super fancy flying around with it is good. I'm willing to live with, like, you know, having lost that instant button for like boring flying. I'm okay with it, but I understand some people are going to be upset. All right, this is the point where I would talk about Bear Druid changes, if they had any. All right, I'm going to start with the first of the 3 hero specs I'm going to be talking about, Wildstalker. And this is the hero spec, I think, that I was like least enthused about among maybe all of the specs that I've talked about so far. Just to kind of show off the top talent, it makes it so that Rip and Rake, so right off the bat, you know that this is tied to bleeds, and so it's going to be a damage over time thing. And because it works with Rip, and you know, Rip is applied by Primal Wrath, it is going to be sort of an AoE oriented tree. It's going to be like passive bleeds. Rip and Rake have a chance to grow a passive bleed on the target that lasts for 6.5 seconds. And then Wild Growth and Regrowth have a chance to blow like a, grow a heal on the target, dealing some healing. And then the final line there says multiple instances of these can overlap. So you get the clear indication that this works just like Bear Druid's Iron form, where they can overlap, but they're not going to have guaranteed 100% uptime or probably even anything close to it. And so, you know, it's just basically a boring bleed, right? I was very unenthused by this, just looking at it right off the bat. And then I got into the game and actually played with it some while leveling, and played with it even just a little bit on like training dummies, some AoE training dummies, so just kind of watch the proc rate. And my mind has been completely changed. I mean, not in the sense of it being complex or like super interesting mechanically. It's not either of those things. It's very basic. It is just free damage procs, but the free damage procs are quite substantial. I was killing a lot of guys just by like throwing a Rip and a Rake into them and then just walking away, and Bloodseeker Vines would, you know, they'd be bleeding and their health would be going down a little bit. And then Bloodseeker Vines would proc from one of those 2 bleeds, and then their health would just immediately get set on fire. So that has actually been pretty pleasant. Ultimately, this is very much a case of like tuning overtaking design, because I do think the design is really not like that compelling, but the tuning on it can definitely make it so that it is, and it has for me. I think a lot of the other talents in here, like Hunt Beneath the Open Skies, does make it so that you want to spec into Lunar Inspiration. It's even using the same icon. I didn't really want to spec into Lunar Inspiration for the obvious reason of just not wanting that extra keybind clutter. Like, I got my keybinds here. Do I really want to fit in a Lunar Inspiration or a Moonfire? I mean, it's not that hard. Alt-2, I think, is where I have it keybound, but like, just, you know, it's one extra thing to keep track of while very quickly blasting through tons of monsters out in the world. You know, you can often barely get all of your bleeds up, especially if you get a Bloodseeker Find proc. You really can't get all your bleeds up by the time they're dead. So now you have a really fun sort of utility-oriented choice node here, where you can make it so that Ursol's Vortex will also root enemies when it grips them back in. I really like that a lot. Or you can make it so that Bark Skin gives you move speed and makes you drop flowers that heal. And I love this. I love the visual. I like the extra bit of move speed. Feral, you know, it's the fastest spec in the game, but it could always be faster. And just dropping healing flowers is super duper fun. Bursting Growth, I think, really emphasizes what this talent tree is all about, which is sort of just AoE bleed damage, lots and lots of AoE proc damage. It makes it so that when the thorns expire, or when you Ferocious Bite something that has thorns on it, they explode, doing some AoE damage. Very clearly an AoE-oriented talent. Then also, you know, when your heals expire, there's a bit of healing proc stuff. I'm really not thinking about Resto Druid at all, or even the healing implications of healing a bit as Feral Druid, but I guess there is something to that. And then finally, our last choice node here, we have Twin Sprouts, which makes it so that when your blooms grow, you have a 20% chance to just get an extra bloom on a nearby target. So again, really locking in the idea that this is random proc damage with tons of procs on it and extra procs, and then some more bonuses that proc and AoE stuff in multi-target situations. Very much an AoE oriented tree. And Implant, by comparison, makes it so that when you gain or lose Tiger's Fury, your next single target melee skill will cause a Bloodseeker Find to grow on the target for 4 seconds. So, you know, you're basically getting like a guaranteed single target proc. You have Root Network giving you some extra damage every time you have a proc, you know, for each of your procs that are active. So hypothetically, you can spec this to be a very single target oriented tree, but I think talents like Bursting Growth and even just stuff like Strategic Infusion in me really emphasizes how much more this talent tree is built around kind of burst AoE damage. Then our final talent here is Vigorous Creepers, 10% increased damage to blood targets that are affected by Bloodseeker Finds. Really not anything more complicated than that. Again, a very basic, simple tree, but one that I like, and I think that really has come down to the like level of simplicity that it has going for it. You know, if I just kind of get in here and like rip all these bad boys up, rip them up, rake them up, see if we can get some procs. There's one right there. And we'll see when it expires, it does a nice little pop into everything. And there's another proc right there. And now we got 2 for 1, 2 for the price of 1 going on that guy. And getting another bite in there. And as you can see, the numbers, they're not huge, they're not large numbers, but they're flying up on the screen, especially if we hide the nameplates. I mean, just so many procs all the time. Yeah, it's, you know, like I have said several times now, very simple, incredibly simple, but coming on the heels of a class that is not simple, I think it's actually not a bad idea for them to have a talent tree that is exactly like this. It is a totally passive proc that you are then able to react to because of the existence of talents like Vigorous Creepers and potentially Root Network, but even if not, like Vigorous Creepers and Bursting Growth make it so you're going to want to swap to that target, you're going to want to bite them. There is still some interactive gameplay happening here. It's just all on the back of passive procs. So I like this tree, I think it's pretty decent. And Druid of the Claw, by comparison, gives you a much more interactive, reactive play style in a way that unfortunately I'm really not that thrilled with. And let's go ahead and start with the top talent here and kind of show off why I'm not that thrilled with it. Ravage makes your next Ferocious Bite into a big AoE cone spell. It deals in like normal single target Ferocious Bite, but then also some AoE arc damage. The issue is that it is tied to auto attacking, giving you that Ferocious Bite proc, and if I just sit here and kind of auto attack for a bit, we'll just look. Oh, okay, we already have a Ravage proc before I even acted. All right, great. Okay, there we go. And now we're just going to sit here and auto attack for a while and wait for that Ferocious Bite to change into a Ravage. And I'm auto attacking, and I'm auto attacking, and I'm auto attacking. Surely it will come. And this is kind of, if I had to really like nail down my biggest issue with this class tree, with this hero spec tree, I've been auto attacking for quite some time. I haven't gotten a proc in a while. Surely, there we go, finally. So, you know, it's been a little bit. And this is true for Bear Druid as well. This is the talent tree that is shared for Feral and Bear Druid. And there's some stuff in here that I really, really liked on paper. We'll just sit here and watch that keybind, that Ferocious Bite turn into a Ravage again. There we go, finally. You know, it's not giving you combo points to instantly use it. It's not working like the Apex Predator's Craving for, like, you know, giving you instant free AoE Ferocious Bites or anything like that. It can interact with Apex Predator's Craving to turn those instant free full damage Ferocious Bites into Ravages, but it's not doing anything to like significantly alter the rotation. It's just making it so that sometimes your Ferocious Bites will be AoEs instead of straight single target. Not a super common proc, as we can see. I'm still auto attacking, by the way. So now let's take a look at some other talents in here. Fount of Strength makes it so that your max energy and rage are increased, and Frenzied Regen increases your max health by 10%. Fine. You know, these are fine bonuses. Frenzied Regen giving you more max health is good for Bear Druid, obviously, for living through burst damage, you know, using Frenzied Regen to heal through it, but also for cats switching into bear form. And there we go, we got another Ferocious Bite. That's great. Or another Ravage on our Ferocious Bite proc. That's great. So especially for Feral Druids who are like using bear form and Frenzied Regen to live through some sort of burst damage, getting that 10% extra health, I think, is incredibly powerful, incredibly influential. So I could see that being useful defensively more than having any sort of like throughput impact. Oh, another Ferocious Bite. Great. All right, let me turn off game sound. Okay, so Wild Shape Mastery makes it so that Iron Fur and Frenzied Regen persist into cat form. So there's some like safety in shifting from bear form into cat form. It also gives you a large chunk of the armor and health from bear form while you're in cat form. And then when you shift from cat form into bear form, or I guess just any form into bear form, you also get a bit of like healing for damage taken over the next 8 seconds. So this is almost exclusively in my mind for bears that are trying to cat weave. I really don't see a lot of value here for cats that are bear weaving, other than just basically the same thing as the bottom line of Fount of Strength, where if you shift into bear form to stay alive for some mechanic, you are a little bit less likely to be killed by it unless it is like one gigantic hit. But if it's some sort of like ticking raid damage and you're able to shift in and Frenzied Regen, then you're a little bit more likely to stay alive. Cool. That's 2 bonuses in a row now that really don't seem like they have any sort of mechanical interaction for Feral's main rotation. And then we have Frenzied Regen. Frenzied Regen can be cast in cat form for 40 energy. Actually pretty good. Potentially like super, super good for staying alive. I do like this. I think this is really good. Bear form gives you 4% more magic damage reduction. You know, for Feral Druids, again, that are shifting into bear form to stay alive, then yeah, okay, I think that could be pretty decent for, you know, magic damage is usually what's going to kill you if you're in like a raid or, you know, you're dealing with some sort of like spell cleave in a Mythic Plus. Fine. The damage increase here is 3% shred and brutal slash damage and 10% mangle damage. Obviously, that mangle damage is purely bear form. So like very, 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 very minor out of the first 3 passives we've looked at in terms of offensive value. Wild Power Surge is the other choice node here, and it makes it so that Shred and Brutal Slash grant you assigned potential. And when you have 8 stacks, the next time you shift into bear form, your Mangle will do 200% increased damage, or your Swipe will do 50% more damage, and then you generate some rage. So just to kind of show that off, and that's going to take a little bit of shredding and brutal slashing. Ugh. All right. Make sure I actually have Mangle Bound as spare. I do. Cool. All right, so just to show off how much damage this deals, it's not a crazy amount. Obviously, why would it be? Okay, we've hit our 8 stacks now. We'll go into, oh god. Okay, we'll go into bear form and I will hit him with a mangle. And that did 25,000 damage. Yep. Let's try another one. Let's try another one just to make sure it's working right. All right, we have Earth Sign potential here. Mangle, go. Wow, 25,000 entire damage. And therein lies the problem, right? Like, this is not huge damage. And the idea of shifting from bear form into cat form to do some damage, cat weaving, makes perfect sense. You are a tank, you are trying to squeeze in some extra damage in a situation where you don't need the defensive value. Either you're tanking a boss that isn't very dangerous, or they're turning and casting spells, and you can quickly shift into out of bear form into cat form, do some damage, shift back into bear form before they hit you again. Or you're not tanking actively. All that makes sense. The idea of a cat shifting out of cat form and into bear form to do a mangle, you know, potentially it's something you could do when you're out of energy. This is something that has driven feral druids absolutely insane with doing like spell weaving, balance weaving, boomkin weaving to shift out of feral form and throw some spells out while their energy is low and then shifting back in. A lot of cat druids really hate it, and I don't blame them. I understand the concern. Really, to nail it down, the idea of cat weaving as a bear druid totally makes sense. You're getting more damage. The idea of bear weaving as a cat druid, you would really have to get a massive increase to your damage for this to be justifiable, and it doesn't seem like it's there. You know, it seems like it's pretty weak. Maybe there is something to be found between combining fluid form and this, and maybe there's something, but I don't really feel like there's anything here. I think that just getting frenzied regen while you're in cat form, you know, kind of cool, and that's basically all there is to this entire left half of the tree. All right, Dreadful Wound is probably the most important of all of these smaller passives here. It goes into Ravage. When you Ravage stuff, it deals some damage, and then Ravage also applies this bleed for 6 seconds that deals extra damage and gives you some damage reduction. It's not affected by Circle of Life and Death, the talent that makes your bleeds hit faster, and that's actually a good thing because it reduces the damage that enemies deal to you, so that is a good thing. It does have the Tiger's Fury quality of life here where, you know, it acts as though Tiger's Fury is active, so you have the hypothetical possibility of being able to extend the bleed, but because the frequency of Ravage procs is so low, that's really not all that common. I'll skip over the middle talent here just for a second to talk about Aggravate Wounds, which makes it so that all attacks that you use, basically, that are in Moonfire, will extend the duration of Dreadful Wounds. You know, if they have an energy cost as Feral, they'll extend the duration of Dreadful Wounds. If they have, basically, if they're not Moonfire as Bear, they'll extend the duration. Now, in the middle here, you have this pair of talents here. Ruthless Aggression makes it so that Ravaging will increase your attack speed for 6 seconds. It's only about 20%. The idea here would be that, like, by getting a proc, you increase your chance of getting a proc, but the frequency of procs is so low that I don't really think this is adding up to all that much. Also, there's a pretty crazy bug where this increase to auto attack speed was also reducing the effect of attack power. I think this has been reported and maybe fixed, but I'm not sure. But basically, this was actually working like a damage reduction. It was actually reducing damage, which is bad. Man, this game has some ancient spaghetti code in it. Killing Strikes, on the other hand, makes it so that when you Ravage, you get an increase to your agility and then also your armor from Iron Fur. So, you know, okay for Bear, I suppose. The first Tiger's Fury after entering combat makes your next Ferocious Bite become Ravage. And, you know, that is good for kind of adding a little bit of juice. As you can see, I was able to force that to be a Ravage. That's good for adding a little bit of extra juice into, like, getting those procs up and getting that opening burst damage up. So I do think this is clearly the better option in the current state of the class, but, you know, just I think generally, even once Ruthless Aggression is working correctly, I still think that Killing Strikes will be the better choice. Bestial Strength makes it so that Ferocious Bite deals 50% more damage and Primal Wrath deals 50% increased direct damage. This is, I think, probably why they killed Tear Open Wounds, which is kind of sad that they did it for a talent on this tree that I'm really not in love with at all. Pax Endurance gives you a couple of extra seconds of Stampeding Roar uptime. Instead of 8 seconds, you get 10. Woo. And then finally, you have either like just crit chance and damage on Shred, Brutal Slash, and Mangle, or 5 seconds off the cooldown of Feral Frenzy, which is, you know, back to its old 45-second cooldown. I've been preferring Strike for the Heart just for like simplicity out while leveling, but honestly, yeah, maybe Tear Down the Mighty is the move. Now, just to kind of cover that as Guardian, well, first I'll just mention Claw Rampage. Okay, so during Berserk, Shred, Brutal Slash, and Thrash have a 25% chance to make your next Ferocious Bite be a Ravage. So this is good for adding some extra juice, but because Incarn is 20 seconds, because Berserk is a 2-minute cooldown, pretty long cooldown, you know, you're not really getting like huge uptime on this. So you're getting these big burst damage windows, I suppose, but I'm just not really like blown away by this compared to Wildstalker. I think that Wildstalker, like, I guess mechanically this has more going on for it, but the mechanic is just that your Ferocious Bite does a little bit of AoE. It just really isn't all that impressive, considering that the damage contribution is about like 40% of the base Ferocious Bite as an AoE, and then also like a bleed that you're able to extend just by doing the standard rotation. You know, it's kind of the same disease that Wildstalker has going for it, where it's procs and there's a little bit of rotational interaction, but it's not super complex, and that's exacerbated by the fact that the proc frequency is so low, I guess 75% of the time, and then the other 15% of the time you have Berserk active and the proc frequency goes up a bit, but it's still not super high. 25% chance, I think, still feels a little bit low. All right, now to show that off as Bear Druid, because there's a little bit of a difference here for the way that Druid of the Claw works for Bear as it does for Feral, and I'll start with the Druid of the Claw. Druid set up as Bear. Now, for the most part, I would say all of this stuff is pretty much the same. I would say, obviously, the ability to use Frenzied Regen in cat form as a Feral Druid is like, who cares? But 10% mangle damage is pretty good, and a constant magic damage reduction is pretty decent. So I think this is okay. But making it so that every 6 mangles, you're able to shift into cat form and instantly Ferocious Bite or Rip for 100% increased damage, I think is actually pretty good for the potential for cat weaving in raid situations. Also, it's not written in here yet, but Wild Shape Mastery has been reworked for Bear Druid so that it gives you crit immunity. If you shift from bear into cat form, you will be immune to crit for that first 6 seconds, so that's good. There was one other talent I wanted to mention in here. Primal Fury, which is almost exclusively cat form value, has also been changed to make it so that Mangle deals 20% increased crit damage. So there is a kind of a necessity to come get this as a Bear Druid now, which is maybe a little annoying because it does make you even more cramped for points. Additionally, for Bear Druid, Killing Strikes makes it so that your first Mangle after entering combat turns Maul into a Ravage. Now, the big difference here for Bear Druid is that your Maul becomes Ravage instead of your Ferocious Bite, so it's still a spender, and we can sit here and look. I talked about this recently in another video, but you know, I think the problem here is that Ravage makes Maul into an AoE skill. It's a single target hit with AoE splash damage. We already have an AoE Maul, it's called Raise. And to basically just have the same idea for like a second time and put it in the tree and have them both like coexist and even have talents in here, where is it? There we go. Bestial Strength. Like, have Maul and Raise damage be increased in the tree. Acknowledge that Raise still exists. Keep buffing it with this tree that is like trying to replace it. It just doesn't make sense to me. You know, basically they've had the same idea a second time, and instead of replacing one of the ideas or whatever, they've just chosen to shove both of them into the tree at once, which really doesn't make sense to me. Also, I wanted to emphasize Tear Down the Mighty. I think there are a lot of cool things that Blizzard could do with Pulverize. They could make it so that instead of consuming Thrash stacks, it like well, I mean, it could just not do that. That would still make it a pretty bad talent. It could add thrash stacks. It could increase the impact of Rend and Tear, or it could do a lot of different things. It could have a shorter cooldown. It could give you damage reduction. You know, it could go back to the old version of giving you damage reduction instead of damage reduction on a single target. There are a lot of things that Pulverize could do that could make it good. Cutting the cooldown by 5 seconds is not that, though. And as you can see, I've been sitting here auto-attacking for a while. I'm just not getting a lot of procs. It's just not really happening. Like, the proc rate just is not good enough for this talent tree to be, like, anything in my eyes. I don't think that this talent tree as it currently exists is anything, which is a bummer because I love the idea of being a shape-shifting druid that's switching back and forth between bear and cat form in raid, using cat weaving, bleeding stuff up. Like, I like that idea. I like some of the other quality of life stuff in the tree. I really do. But I mean, look at how long I've gone between procs. Just not enough. Just it's the same syndrome that they had with the class tree, where they had this problem and the fix to it was to try to keep everything exactly the same in terms of power and just shuffle everything around. How long until we get another proc? I'm complaining to make it trigger and it's not working. I'm just gonna sit here until I get another proc, truly. How long? This is so perfect. There we go, finally. So perfectly making my point for me. Yeah, that couldn't have been better for me, really. All right, now let's wait until we're out of combat finally, and we can shift over to the much more interesting and powerful Lunar Bear talent tree. I will probably need to stop triggering Galactic Guardians in order to be able to do that. Okay, Elune's Chosen, by comparison, is way more fun, way more interesting, and, you know, kind of in a way that's completely shocking to me. Now I've been playing around with this, I've been getting real weird with it. I took Convoke, which I definitely don't think is good or going to replace Incarn unless they do something with Incarn, like cut the duration on it or get rid of the cooldown reduction or something. I do still think Incarn is the move, but I've just been playing around with Convoke just for the hell of it. Okay, let's look at this tree here. Boundless Moonlight makes it so that your Lunar Beam gives you 10% leech while you're in the beam. That's leech on all skills, not just from the Lunar Beam. And it makes it so that Fury of Elune, which you are able to get from some talents in here, does like an extra damage proc. Fine. Moon Guardian makes it so that free Moonfires from Galactic Guardian generate 5 rage, and I can demonstrate that by just like swiping with my back turned. There we go. 5 rage. See if I can just swipe from it. There we go. All right, cool. All right, Lunar Amplification makes it so that non-arcane skills increase the damage of your next arcane skill, and then it stacks up to 3 times. It does get, as you can see, consumed by Galactic Guardian. Yeah. Not super duper complicated, but a bit of a fun, straightforward damage buff. Now you have 2 options here. You can get Lunar Beam and Fury of Elune damage out of Stellar Command, or you can get Lunar Calling, which makes it so that your Thrash deals arcane damage and deals more damage. And so that arcane damage, it doesn't change the appearance, unfortunately, which is, yeah, kind of a bummer, but it applies to both the direct damage and the damage over time, and I like that a lot. Lunar Insight makes your Moonfire do more damage. Very straightforward. Very good for damage output, but, you know, super simple. Atmospheric Exposure makes it so that enemies you hit with Fury of Elune or Lunar Beam will take more damage from you. Again, very simple. And then here you have the talent that makes it so that you can get Fury of Elune. Light of Elune makes it so that Moonfire damage gives you a proc chance that will call down 3 seconds of a Fury of Elune, doing a fair amount of damage and also triggering that explosion and giving you some rage. And then also giving you the capstones power that gives extra damage and also more rage. The reason I'm not taking it is because I've been playing around with Astral Insight, which again, don't know that that's necessarily the move, but it just gives you 10% increased arcane damage from Guardian of Ursoc, you know, Incarn, or 25% increased duration and number of spells from Convoke. And, you know, like I said, I was playing around with Convoke, so like I kind of like that, like for this weird wonky bad build that I'm playing, but I think generally speaking, Light of Elune is going to be probably the move to get more juice out of Boundless Moonlight and Eternal Moon and Atmospheric Exposure. And, you know, I think that's probably the play. Also, more rage to fuel Incarn cooldown reduction. Pretty good. All right, Glistening Fur also gives you magic damage reduction, just like the Druid of the Claw Druid talent tree does. So I don't really think either of them has like a monopoly on that magic damage reduction. Magic damage is something that Bear Druid has kind of struggled with, and so, you know, that is good to have. You basically have the option here of Moondust giving you like a 30% permanent slow on everything, which I think can be pretty good, or getting just a 3-second shorter cooldown on Wild Charge. You know, instead of the 15, it's 12. Then in the final choice node here, you have Arcane Affinity, which is just 3% more arcane damage, very boring and simple. Or you have this incredible talent here that gives you 3 seconds of cooldown reduction on Lunar Beam every time you use an arcane ability. And this doesn't apply to proc, so we'll use Lunar Beam here. It counts itself, which is pretty awesome. And as you can see here, I'm just going to sit and swipe with my back turn just to get more Galactic Guardian procs, not doing anything. Also, I have a Galactic Guardian proc banked up, so I'll hit that Moonfire, and you can see Twin Moonfire hitting 2 targets. That's not doing anything either. So you're not getting any value out of procs. But I'll hit some Thrashes, and as you can see, because my Thrash is arcane because of Lunar Calling, it is actually counting toward that Lunar Beam cooldown reduction. Now you'll note also that I've taken Flashing Claws. I'm trying to fish for a proc. All right, let's go ahead and reset Lunar Beam here. I'm trying to fish for a proc, see if I can get a proc. You'll notice though that the procs do not count. The Thrash procs do not count. Can we get a proc? Nope, not yet. Still no proc. All right, we're gonna get a proc here any second now. I'm sure of it, I believe. Not this second, though. All right, soon, surely. There we go. Okay, we got 2 procs and we only got 1 cooldown reduction. So, right, the procs from Galactic Guardian aren't counting, but they are giving us Rage for Moon Guardian, so, you know, still good. Still giving us tons of damage, too. But Galactic Guardian procs are not counting for the cooldown reduction, and Thrash procs from Flashing Claws are not counting for the reduction. So I do think that means Flashing Claws is probably out, even though you would think with Lunar Calling being pretty good that Thrashing Claws would probably be, or Flashing Claws would probably be pretty good, but I kind of think it probably isn't. Definitely some interesting stuff to think about in the tree down here. Like, do you want to take Ursox Fury? It would be hard not to take it. Do you want to take Raise? It would be hard not to take it. Do you want to take Elune's Favorite since you're doing so much magic damage? Seems like a yes. You probably would rather have that than Ursox Fury, or, I mean, God, what about both? You know, it's definitely like there's a lot of difficult decisions to make down here. Do you give up Rage of the Sleeper to get Raise or Blood Frenzy or Elune's Favored? I'm not sure. There's definitely a lot of valuable talents down here in this bottom third of the tree. I mean, almost everything down here except for like Pulverize and Scintillating Moonlight is really, really valuable and appealing. Maybe Flashing Claws also. Definitely there's some wiggle room. Definitely there's some business decisions to be made down here, but I think the biggest one is really just like you gotta wait for Blizzard to do something with the Bear Druid spec tree. Also, one thing I was hoping for with the Convoke is that all of these spells would give cooldown reduction, and as you can see, none of them do. So I do think Convoke is probably like dead, but you know, I miss Convoke, and I was playing around with it while just like kind of playing out in the world, and it was fun to do. I still like Convoke. I wish it were good. That's okay. I mean, I think the Light of Elune is a much better option, like... Probably, you know, proc rate will always determine whether it's any good or not. But if we just throw some Moonfires out and then just kind of wait Moonfire damage, we're just going to spam Moonfire. Why not? We're just going to throw Moonfire out like constantly until we get one of those Light of Elune or Fury of Elune procs to go off. Any second now, I'm sure of it. Hey, there we go. Finally, we finally got ourselves a nice Fury of Elune proc. That looked pretty cool. It did do some damage. It did give us some rage as well. So Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that this is quite a change of pace from where Bear Druid has been for the last couple of expansions. It's a super spell-oriented tank. This is basically the caster tank that people have wanted for many years. This ability to just like bomb spell damage into tons of enemies and potentially get tons of healing out of the deal. It's really great. Like, this is incredibly strong. It's hilarious to me that Lunar Beam is actually good now, but with Eternal Moon giving you an extra 10% mastery and making it last 3 seconds longer, it's up for 11 seconds at a time. You are getting tons of cooldown reduction. It might be up about 35% of the time, realistically, potentially more. Thanks to the cooldown reduction that you get out of Lunation, it is just available so often. And 30% mastery, 10% leech, the extra bit of damage increase that you get out of it, like, it just is a really, really good talent now, which is, again, hilarious considering how bad it had been for so long, but it's in good shape now. What can you say? All right, so just to kind of conclude here, I know this is a bit long. I've always loved Bear Druid. I mean, I played Feral Druid in vanilla, so I'm a pretty long time Druid enjoyer, and I'm really feeling like they might be on the way back up. The fact that they haven't gotten any sort of changes at all to the Bear Druid talent tree, the spec tree specifically, means that I think there's actually a lot of room for hope, because the current state of the Elune's Chosen tree is insane. One of the strongest tank specs in the game. I think the only thing that's really like close would be Blood DK with Sand Lane. Maybe Master of Harmony Brewmaster Monk would be close, but yeah, Bear Druid with Elune's Chosen is incredibly strong, and it is a totally different archetype from all of the other tanks. So even if it just winds up being like good instead of overpowered, it is something that feels very different to play, and that is really, really satisfying and good to have. I'm really glad to have that difference, that variety. As for the Druid of the Claw Druid, as fun as it is to say the name of that hero spec, I think that the low proc rate on Ravage and the kind of low impact that it has rotationally, just the idea that it's basically copying Raze, kind of makes it a real bummer for me. I am hopeful that Blizzard can do more to make it more interesting, but thus far I am pretty underwhelmed by Druid of the Claw Druid. But not by Elune's Chosen. It rules, and I really do enjoy Wildstalker as well, simple though it is. Alright, so that is it for Druid thus far in the War Within Alpha, and I am pretty happy about the class. As I've said elsewhere, I really do think this is a great time for tanks right now. This is the moment of optimism. All of the tanks could be good going forward, and I do think Bear Druid is very competitive on that front. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.